I'm struggling. I can't do this. I can't do that. I'm paralyzed by my perfectionism. I'm not moving forward in X, Y, or Z part of my life. And I don't start and give them a to-do list. I start with, okay, why does that make sense for you? Let's take away some of the self-blame. Let's take away some of the shame. And let's acknowledge that this is something that you built because you had to.
Yeah.
And then how do we create your life even with a difficult past? And this is what I know you do beautifully, but how do we create a life even if there's a difficult past? How do we create a beautiful life going forward that's on your terms, that's based on your values and what you want things to look like?
Yeah.
It's such good. I can't believe this is a job, what we do. It's wonderful.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the Thrive with Sharon podcast. I am Sharon Land, and I am a holistic psychotherapist, licensed in the state of New Jersey, and a trauma specialist, and also a healer, a metaphysician, and your podcast host. And I'm so excited because this community just continues to grow and grow and grow. And I have one of my Instagram friends on today who I'm just so excited about. And because we overlap in so many different areas of our own passion and our own work. And I really look up to a lot of what she does. And so I have today Dr. Jen Douglas, PhD, on the show. And I'm so excited. And we're going to talk all things perfection and all things that she is actually working on right now. But first, I want to introduce a little bit more about her. She is a licensed psychologist, a Stanford clinical assistant professor. She's an executive coach, a consultant, a partner, and a mother. And Dr. Jen specializes in helping high performing and achieving individuals to overcome their own perfection, to reach their fullest potential, personally and professionally. And Dr. Jen turns her unique approach, and I definitely think that she does have a unique approach, which I really, really love, to mental health, towards women and non-binary individuals at the intersection of identity, professionalism, and parenting, which I cannot wait to talk more about. And Dr. Jen and her work have been featured across news outlets, including Newsweek, NBC News, Glamour, and NPR. So, Dr. Jen, I am so excited to have you here. I wish we were on the same side of the country. I'd be giving you such a big hug. It's so good to see you. So good to have you today.
I know. And thank you for your patience. You know, it's so funny about the working parenthood thing. And we had to push this back, I think maybe more than once, because my toddler kept getting sick. And it's just another example of imperfection. And yet here we are, and it's going to be amazing. And I'm so grateful to have this time to chat with you.
Oh my gosh. Of course. You know what? And we just talked about the fact that even though there were a couple of fumbles of the ball on the way in, right? But it turned out to actually be really perfect. So yes. For all of us. And so for so many different reasons. So, I don't even know where to start. My gosh. So the first thing is I absolutely love, you came on the scene, right? On Instagram, and boom, right? As soon as I saw you, I was like, wow, this is an incredible individual. And I loved your tone, and I loved your approach to mental health and mental wellness, really. And it was so inclusive. And that is so much of my passion, is really inclusivity. And so tell me how you arrived at that. And I know you've been practicing in the mental health arena for like 14 years, right?
For a while now. Yeah. We don't need to, no one needs to do the math on that. But no, I so appreciate it. And I think, Sharon, it's why I gravitated to your work too, because you have this holistic lens. And it's so funny. I've done a few of these podcasts recently, and you're the first person to have asked me, why this kind of holistic lens on intersectionality and sort of including everybody's voice. And even before we started recording, you and I were talking about that we both are trauma-informed therapists. It's near and dear to our heart. And you beautifully phrased it as wanting everyone to have a voice, wanting everyone to have a seat at the table. And that's just at the heart of everything that you do. It comes through your Instagram work. I can't imagine being your client. I bet it's amazing. and and it's the same thing for me. I wasn't planning on going into mental health. I took a class on disordered eating, which we know affects women and non-binary folks more so than other populations, which we know has, particularly hard numbers. A lot of people suffer from these illnesses in the LGBTQ population and marginalized populations, all these things. And when you look at, there's individual trauma, and then there's societal trauma, and there's societal silencing, there's societal erasure. So when we talk about healing, it's not just healing on the individual level, it's healing on the societal level. It's making people visible, it's elevating voices. And without that, we're social creatures. We can't heal in silos.
Yeah, we don't live in a bubble.
Yes.
Right. And I love that you mentioned the fact that it's a societal thing. And as much as it affects each one of us a little bit differently in the sense that, because we all have our own predisposition to all of these different things. Right. So there's going to be a little piece of that, which is why I think, as another bookmark for maybe another conversation, why I think sometimes it can be tricky when we're working in the trauma space, right? Because it's not a very linear, like this happens, then you do this, and then that happens, and then you do that. And, so there's so many nuances to it, right? But when it comes to intersectionality, and when it comes to the collective, right? I speak in terms of like maybe more spiritual terms, right? The collective society, right? That we really have to look at this as something that, even though I may not be experiencing the exact same thing that someone else is, that has no bearing on whether or not I should be advocating or becoming an ally or speaking out on or educating or so on and so on and so on, because ultimately, like you said, we're all here to connect now more than ever.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So that's incredible. So you went from just studying a little bit on eating disordered and disordered eating, and then it just kind of snowballed.
Yes. Snowball is the word. I literally took a class in undergrad. I was going to be a lawyer. Took a class in undergrad because it started at 1 p.m., which meant I could go party the night before, sleep in, and then go to class and fulfill my requirement. And then it changed my life. I was like, oh my gosh. And I see psychology and mental health as a social justice movement, because that's where healing takes place. It's because everybody deserves this. This is a civil right that everyone should have, but it's not nurtured in the same way for everyone across the board in our country.
No, it's not. And speaking from a global sense, it's also really not, there's nothing cohesive anywhere when it comes to really inclusivity and taking a moment to become curious about a situation before we judge the situation so that we can act on it. Right. I think that part of my platform and part of the thing that I'm very passionate about is this fact that we've been all in survival mode for so long. And what does that mean? Right. And so part of what that, if we were to put that over this conversation, over this topic, part of what that is that, when we're in survival mode, we're really only able to see things in a very myopic sense, right? So we're only really able to see one thing, and we're usually looking for the thing that we can act on. And so when we don't have the ability to step back or take half of a breath even, right? And be curious about the fact that like, hey, I wonder why this person is so upset. Or I wonder why there is this deep angst or despair that they're experiencing. collectively, right?
Yes.
Societally. And how is it that we can just open up and unpack information so that we can look at it and not necessarily fix the problem, but even just open the conversation up so that we can allow that to multiply itself, allow that connection to multiply itself. So I see you do that in so many different ways. I love it actually, because I love the fact that, one of the misnomers, I think that, I don't know if you experience this or not, but people who aren't mental health professionals, who go to see mental health professionals, think that they're perfect, that they have everything all together.
Yes.
And most of us also don't have a sense of humor. And, which we found that out pretty early on. We're just like, oh yeah, okay.
Yes, this is why we connect.
We speak humor. I love the stuff that like makes you kind of snort as you're watching it.
True.
But yeah, I wonder though, how much of that for you is, do you have to fight to keep space for?
Fight to keep space for with myself or with my clients, or just across the board?
Well, of course. Yeah. Definitely fight to keep space for yourself. But also just to be intentional about that.
Yes. Well, I think that really resonates in particular with me, and why I chose perfectionism as really this thing to hone in on. Like, you talk so beautifully about spirituality and about trauma and about healing and all these things. And you'll notice that when I speak on social media, I'm mostly talking about perfectionism and occasionally mention, trauma and body image and these types of things.
Yes.
But that perfectionism piece is that thread that seems to be the commonality that's woven from defensiveness, from trying to protect ourselves from rejection, from, if we're scared that we're not worthy, then we can achieve our way out of that fear, and it can bring us very much in a headspace rather than a heart space. And so, like, when you're talking about fighting for that space, I feel like battling perfectionism and what I call in my course freedom from perfectionism is really about making that the center focus of my work with so many people, because the diagnosis, whether it's anxiety or depression or OCD or eating disorders, what you're battling is that false need and really just not even possible bar of perfectionism as this idea of what's going to keep us safe and loved.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And do you think that part of that is, that's underneath that, one of the drivers is that we just don't feel good enough? That not enoughness?
I do. It's, I talk a lot in my course about the different pathways that can turn into perfectionism, sort of the etiology where it comes from. And, sometimes it can come from trauma. Sometimes it can come from high expectations or, not a lot of, unconditional love. But the heart of it is exactly what you're saying, that fear and that feeling that we are not enough. And so we turn outward and we turn to our boss's approval. We turn to being the best partner, being the best, class mom, or whatever it is, or having the shiniest new car in the parking lot. We turn to these external signals that we are good enough. And that's where we can really lose our way, especially as a spiritual healer. I'm sure you see people where they're so far down the perfectionistic path, they might walk in and say, hey, I don't know myself. I don't even know what I want. I don't even know what a good life looks like anymore.
Yeah, 100%. That happens. And it's challenging because when you're so dysregulated, right? When we're talking about nervous system regulation, which is part of what happens when we're chasing that moving target of that we're never going to be able to meet, it just makes us more, like you said, either depressed or anxious or
Yep.
or whatever, however it's going to manifest itself. Right.
Yes.
And, we do become dysregulated in our nervous system. And that then creates that numbness, because a lot of the tools that we've learned in our coping with these environments, maybe from a very, very young age, a great majority of them, at least that I find in my practice, is that they disassociate. So they numb, they find a way to not feel, right? Because it is so painful.
Yes.
It's so painful. I love the fact that you're doing this. When you first said, "Oh, I'm doing a course on perfectionism," I was like, "Oh, well, that's perfect for me because I'm perfect right now." And I was like, "Oh no,
it's the other way.
It's that. Oh, which actually I am. I've publicly said to you in responses to a lot of your fantastic information out there is like, I'm a recovering perfectionist, right?
Yep.
So check the box on so many different things. So with eating disorders and recovering from trauma and, all of this external validation. So I just love the fact that you're doing this. And I can only imagine it was challenging how far do you go? Like, where do you even
Yeah. How do we chip away at something that we might have built over so many years?
Yes.
Absolutely. And that's sort of the fun part. That's what I love about what I do is, for instance, I was talking to a client the other day and she's a, new mom and she's working and she's doing all the things and everything. And I was asking her, really what she could let go and what would be okay. And for her, it's really hard. Her perfectionism keeps her from speaking up in meetings and sharing her ideas, which I see so often. And I can remember being at conferences and having this burning question that I thought would really, kind of push the envelope and be really important. And I was just, sweating with anxiety and my face was red. And I just couldn't bring myself to put myself out there enough to say something that wasn't already deemed like, with the check mark of being okay.
Yeah.
And so I empathize greatly with folks who are at that level in their journey. And so what we were talking about is to just expose herself to putting herself out there, not needing to share the most earth-shattering idea in the world, but just to say something, even if she says, "Oh, I really appreciated your point," or that was a really great presentation. And it was so wonderful to watch because her shoulders just dropped. And she said, oh, I can talk and I can take up space, even if I don't have the world's best idea that's been said in the last 2 years on my team. Like, I still deserve to have a seat at the table, like you so beautifully said.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I have a client that, oh my God, I'm like, you are my spirit animal. What she said is, she said, I never asked permission to sit at the table. I just sat.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I was like,
I brought my own chair. Yes. Well, and what I love about this, I had an old client who I, coached how to do this, and she got promoted almost immediately.
Oh,
because she's brilliant. All the people I work with are brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's the perfectionism lies to us and says, well, if you play by the rules, if you do everything just right, if you overthink everything and get really into the details and perfect the details, then you will succeed. But what happens is those people get so pigeonholed and so caught up in the little things in their internal monologue that they don't get the chance to show the world what they can do.
Yeah.
And then you let go of some of that perfectionism and actually put yourself out there. And this is what Instagram is for me. I mean, the idea of being on social media was like horrific to, these ivory tower folks who I hang out with. And yet that's the space where I'm actually doing the work that I love, interacting with, real people, and getting this word out there, not just in a one-on-one therapy session, but to thousands of human beings.
Yes. Yeah, it is such a gift, right? And it's a wonderful tool. And I know that we can tend to have a love-hate relationship with it because it can be time consuming, and we can
Yes.
also be the consumer, maybe a
Yes.
little bit too much. But I think if we really have that intentionality of saying, this is going to be a space where I can connect and then take the relationships to another platform, to another level, right? So kind of like what we're doing. And so that's what I think we could really use it for. And I love the fact that, you can try this and try that and be a little creative. And, I have a poetry page and,
yeah.
And I just, you know what I mean? It's just, there's a nuance, and I'm sure you could speak to this in the very beginning, my experience with being on something like social media was I would get such anxiety before I'd press the button to post.
Yes.
Did you
Totally relate to that. Totally relate to that in the beginning of all of this. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the beauty that I love is when we're battling perfectionism, because that's perfectionism. It's fear of putting our knowledge out there, fear of how we're putting it out there. Am I doing it right? Fear of, oh, how is this going to be received? This is going to be buried. Is anybody going to care? Is someone going to say it's stupid? It's all the vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And so I look back and I'd just be shaking at the beginning. I mean, really palpably anxious.
Yeah.
And now since the pandemic, I'm too tired to be anxious about anything. But
it's completely beaten down.
Yeah, I'm just like, whatever, just put it up, it's fine. But it's that repeated exposure. You and I have done that, have put ourselves out so many times, and it's beautiful to watch. It's not pleasant in the moment, but you watch something just bomb, just whether or not it just doesn't take off, or people don't like it, or some people say, oh, that's not my experience at all, and da 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 da. And you watch yourself survive that. And you watch yourself still be a person of value. And even if someone's saying, oh, this is garbage, that someone else says, no, this really rang true for me. And thank you for putting that out there. I felt alone.
Yes.
And I've never regretted putting something out there, ever, 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 ever. And I think that's the difference, is when you move beyond perfectionism and more of all this mindfulness, there is no incorrect path. There's just the path that we have.
Yeah.
There is no regret. There's no beating ourselves up over being imperfect, because it's just us showing up authentically over and over again. And like your client said, making a seat at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to ask permission. It's just because it's there for everyone. Yeah. I love this saying, there's plenty of pie for everyone, right?
Oh, yes.
And some will say, there's a slice for everyone. And I'm like, no, there's a whole smorgasbord of pie.
Yes,
there is a
pie, y'all.
There's a pie buffet out there for me. I'm not getting a slice. If I'm going to go for the pie, I am going to have all of the pie. Right. And that's the thing is it's okay. And I love the fact that you highlighted when you sat back and you watched, because I don't know many who just post or share or publish anything like an article or whatever it may be, and not peek to see if any eyes are on it, right? Or if there's any attention, right? But the fact that you almost were training yourself to be like, it's okay. No matter how many hearts you get, or how many comments you might get, or emails from somebody who said, hey, that article was great. It's meant to be there.
Yes. And the right people find it.
Yeah. And then the right people find it. And I am one of those who I have really lived in an ambiguous space for a lot of my life. Right. And I can only speak to what it's like to be me living in the ambiguous space of the spaces that I was in. Right. But I only can liken that experience, a little bit of the tension, the stress, the anxiety of really being surrounded by a whole bunch of you know, Canadian geese, right? For lack of a better word. And you're the black swan, right?
Yeah.
Nobody,
Yeah.
so if you are looking outwardly to see like, you know, you go to open up your mouth, like your client and you make this big, like quacky thing, right?
Yep.
And then the geese make the honk. And,
Yes.
you know, so,
Yes.
and if you were to say, well, but I don't sound like them and I don't look like them and I don't fly like them and I don't fly in a pack like that. And I don't, you know, I can only imagine, especially when we're talking about like the non-binary and all of these areas where we really have to do more work to be inclusive of, as far as I'm concerned. You're
yes,
saying
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I can only imagine all of the myriad of feelings and all of the experiences within the physical body and the energetic body that each person has to be in that same ambiguous space.
Yes. And as healers, recognizing that when someone walks into our office, when someone, you know, scrolls past our accounts, what have you, that they're showing up holding all of that tension, all of that exhaustion, all of that sometimes needing to put on, you know, this certain face. It wasn't until, you know, because all right, we're going deep. This is what's happening. so
For it.
So when we talk about freedom from perfectionism, and then we also have to have it interact with our society.
Yeah.
You know, as folks who went through graduate school and all these, you know, different professional institutions, you know, to some extent we had to play the game. There were places where I had to play the game and I had to keep quiet and I had to pretend I was a Canadian goose and honk instead of quack and do all those things. And then it's about, well, do I have enough power where I can be different and I can let myself out in this space? And that's where I've seen people rock it. Because what often happens, and I think this happens especially for women and for gender diverse folks, is that we are so used to not having power, you know, from when we are very, very small, needing to be closeted about some aspects about our identity or our viewpoints, that when we finally get to the place where we can really show our voice, we have lost that muscle. And then it becomes scary.
Yeah. Yes. 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 I just want those words to land for a second because it's deep, it's heavy, but it's the truth. It is the reality of what we are continuing to move through. I like to look at it from a perspective of resilience and growth.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I always want to honor our experiences. They were real and they are real and they're still currently living within us. You know, one of the things that I love is the study of epigenetics, right?
Yes.
And so the trauma, the biological DNA of the trauma from our ancestors literally still lives within us. And it actually can affect things like our energetic and vibrational patterning, and that, which then could also affect our free will and maybe even our thinking or whatever. Not to say that we can't change it, but it's still here, right? It's still with us until we actually learn how to heal that and how to move through that. So to your point, like when somebody is bringing this to you, at least for me, I'm curious how you go about this. Is I make room for the fact that there is stuff that's yours, stuff that you're conscious of, stuff that you are have a knowing, but don't have the words to be able to express it.
Yes.
Right? And then also these parts of us that exist. And, you know, some of my clients, they're fearful to even express these things because they're afraid that they're going to be diagnosed as crazy or, as multiple personality or whatever else. Right. So how do you approach that in a way where, and even, I know we're talking one-on-one, but I guess talking about the societal responsibility, then once we know that, how do you alchemize that?
Yes. Oh, it's such a beautiful question. I love that. And I love how you talk about making space for it, because when we interact with anyone in any way, even if we're, at a grocery store and we're interacting with somebody, just an acknowledgement that there is a whole person there who's experienced a lifetime of difficulties, of microaggressions, of the weight of whatever they're holding, and sometimes intergenerational, like you're talking about epigenetics. And I have a lot of people who come to me and they say, oh, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I have trauma, I have perfectionism. And there's almost this shame about it, like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And as healers, and you just do this, okay? And like, this is why I loved getting on Zoom with you. So I'm sure when your clients walk in the room, they can just tell that you do this, because when you're in the presence of this, you can sense it. But when someone comes in, I believe it's, a healer's job to recognize that the things that are going on with them, even if society deems them as, diagnosable and all these things, but that those are adaptations that they participate in because they were at one point useful and helped them survive. And so someone comes to me and they say, oh, I'm struggling. I can't do this. I can't do that. I'm paralyzed by my perfectionism. I'm not moving forward in X, Y, or Z part of my life. And I don't start and give them a to-do list. I start with, okay, why does that make sense for you? Let's take away some of the self-blame. Let's take away some of the shame. And let's acknowledge that this is something that you built because you had to.
Yeah.
And then how do we create your life even with a difficult past? And this is what I know you do beautifully, but how do we create a life even if there's a difficult past? How do we create a beautiful life going forward that's on your terms, that's based on your values and what you want things to look like?
Yeah.
It's such good. I can't believe this is a job, what we do. It's wonderful.
I know it really is. It's so beautiful. And, sometimes people will say, well, aren't you really tired at the end of the day? And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's kind of like a good tired, right? It's sometimes there's some heavy stuff, right?
Yeah.
But even when I was a professional trainer, I was a professional equestrian and I would work with horses and sometimes I would do energy work and body work and, and conditioning and all of this different stuff, right? Because I've always been granola crunchy, no matter what.
Yes.
Every place that I was in, I brought my flower pants, I
love it. I love it. Yes. It's the only way to be.
So like holistically, we need to look at this situation, right? But I just feel like it's important to be able to hold space for all of those pieces and that lens and realize that like even taking it into training young horses, right? Or training a horse that's a moderately young horse, right? And maybe they've already been through, where they were birthed and maybe there was some starting, it's called starting there, right? So there was some starting and some handling and whatever. And then they go to another place that's supposed to train them for some sort of a discipline. And then they end up becoming a problem, right? And then they go somewhere else and then they try and like fit them into something else that would be useful. And, and then I might get them. Right. And they might be 5 or 6. Right. So in your mind, if you're looking at it from a logical perspective, you're thinking, well, this horse is still so young. And so we just need to, like we were talking about before. Oh, so you've experienced a problem, right? Or you are demonstrating a behavioral problem.
Yes.
So to your point before, you don't start out by saying, oh, well, then do this and then do that. And then report back to me next week and let me know that you did all of these things. And, you know, we have to allow which is why I loved working with animals. They can't tell you.
Yeah.
Right. At this last place, my foot got stuck in an electric fence and, whatever. And that's why I'm always afraid when I go back. You don't know, but you deal with what you have. You deal with what's there. And so I love the fact that you really come from that trauma-informed space where you're just like, listen, before we move on to learning all of these new tools and whatever, I don't want to be that person that makes you feel like another failure, because it's really hard to do something when you're still not able to greet the wound.
Yes. It's that honoring of the person's experience or the horse's experience that I don't have to see. And I think for perfectionists especially, there's almost this idea, well, if I am imperfect in any way, I have to prove why. This is why so many perfectionists procrastinate. If a perfectionist knows that they're not going to do well on a test, or not going to do it well on a presentation at work, they will stay up late the night before and have sort of a scapegoat for why that won't go well, because there's that protection. There's so much fear that we might be imperfect without something to point to and say.
Right. A major flaw, a major, catastrophe, chaos, right? It's self-destructive in a way, but it's also self-protective, like you said.
Exactly.
So that's a really interesting thing to point out. I think it would be really helpful for us to break that down a little bit more, because there are so many people who are struggling. They're in school, and when we're really not able to identify that we're just feeling anxious about not performing, not passing, not whatever, fill in the blank, that we have this other buildup of another thing. So from the trauma perspective, we call it like hyper disassociation or distraction or whatever that is. Right. But it doesn't always have to come from trauma. It just can come from just that fear of not being perfect. So tell me more about that. Tell me more about that.
So in a perfectionist's mind, there's kind of this understood concept that a perfectionist will take us through. And I, as a recovering perfectionist, this creeps into my mind too. So I'm not othering. I think everyone experiences this to some extent. There's this understanding that, if something is hard, and if I work harder, I can outsmart it, I can make it better, I can fix it. Problem is that we don't actually have as much control over the universe as our brains would like to tell us that we do.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I wish it weren't true too. So if I work for 6 hours on my resume before submitting it to the LinkedIn job post, that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to have an interview.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Darn. And if I stay up until 2:00 in the morning running through the conversation and what I could have done differently in a fight with my partner, that doesn't mean I'm going to wake up and the relationship will be fixed. This is the intellectualizing and the problem solving. This is what perfectionists do great. And to some extent, it can work to a certain extent. Like in academia, usually, there's a certain amount of studying that's going to improve on the test, until you get the irrational professor, and then it doesn't. That's very frustrating for the perfectionist.
Yes.
And so in some of these circumstances where there are things that don't come naturally to us, that we haven't mastered, whatever it might be, I have so many, I work at a university and I see clients who are students, and some of them are just beating themselves up, just a high heck about not getting A's during COVID.
I'm laughing, but I know. Yeah.
And and some of them are stressed and their parents are in other countries and they haven't seen them for all this time. And, this incredibly stressful situation.
Yeah.
And they're beating themselves up because they're struggling in like chemistry 405 or whatever the class is. And it's like, there's a pandemic. Your brain knows that chemistry 405 isn't that big a deal. That's why you're not excelling in chemistry 405. Your brain is keeping you alive.
Yeah, that's right.
Our brains know it's important. And so when that happens, when we feel an insecurity about something, when we don't feel positive we're going to do something well, we often end up procrastinating because we feel uncomfortable engaging with something we can't do perfectly. If anyone listening to this has ever wanted to try a new hobby, but they don't, they want to try horseback riding or rollerblading or, basketball or whatever, but they haven't done it because they're worried what people will think and if people will look at them and they won't be the best person in the room, that's perfectionism.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. We put these things off, and especially from an anxious brain, right? We're already having the relationship with whatever it was. We're already there. We've already seen ourselves not be able to do it. We put the crystal ball, being intuitive is one thing, but then the anxious brain mirrors intuition.
Yes.
Right.
And it's the worst case scenario version of intuition.
It's always
right?
that. It's always the worst case scenario. It's the one where they fall and they, break their arm and then they can't work and can't write their papers and, all of that stuff. Yeah. So, there's a saying, and I'm sure you have heard it too, in like the coaching profession, like take messy action, right?
Oh, I
Taking messy
love
action,
that.
like giving
That's
permission for messy action. And I really, that was very helpful for me.
Yeah.
Because I was one of those where it was an all or nothing situation, right? It was just like, I'm either not going to do anything and I'm going to let it be a complete mess, or everything is going to be like
perfect.
OCD, literally everything is lined up. And so my brain at the time didn't know that there was something else.
Yeah. There's another option out there.
There's another option.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your course, tell me more about your course, because I want people to take this course. I'm so excited for people to take this course.
I'm going to send you a copy of this course because I think it's important that you see it firsthand. I think this podcast is actually coming out on the last day to buy the course, and then it'll close for, a few months because I have to teach and spend less time on Instagram.
Yeah.
So people know that. And so what's really cool about this course is it goes through the etiology, where perfectionism comes from, what maintains perfectionism and keeps us on these maladaptive behaviors.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
And then we talk about how to move away from perfectionistic thinking, and then how to move away from perfectionistic behaviors.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, because we can talk all day in our minds about it's okay, and most perfectionists have said to themselves, it's okay if you don't do well on this. It's okay if you're not perfect in this way. But until we show up in our lives and say the thing at the meeting or bring up to our partner when we're stressed or we have a need and we're willing to do that imperfectly, there's no way that we'll actually see change in our lives.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So we have those. We have how to maintain gains and then identify if we're backsliding. So I am a perfectionist in recovery. It comes up periodically and I have to catch myself. There's a lot of kind of maintenance work on that. And then I have bonus modules on sneaky ways perfectionism might sneak into your life and you may not notice. So these are things like body image, dating, parenting, etc. And then there's a bonus module on perfectionism and trauma because it's such an important thing.
Oh my gosh. I really hope that everybody who is watching and listening really takes you up on this course. And
It's wonderful.
it's even if I can't think of anybody who wouldn't benefit from this course, because either it's like someone who you love,
Yes.
who's going through this angst, right?
Yeah.
It's being more informed as a
Mhm.
coach, as a therapist, as a healer,
Oh,
as a,
yes.
you know,
Oh, yes.
CEO. I'm just thinking about just professionals and all of this stuff, right?
Mhm.
Um, I can't think of parents for children who are very anxious about their own performance and
Yes.
really still battling the old societal lens of you abandon everything, abandon all of your needs because
Mm.
you have to get these grades and you have to get this, run time so that you can get
Yeah.
recruited by this school so that you can, you know, so that
Mhm.
so that your life will be okay. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, how many young individuals have we seen that are in college and they have gastritis and ulcers and
Yes.
migraines
Yes.
and
Yes. And anxiety and eating disorders and all
anxiety.
of these things.
Yeah.
My biggest motivator and why I made the course and wanted to get it out to so many people was when my daughter was born.
Mm,
And I wanted to break that intergenerational pattern. I know why it's an intergenerational pattern in my family. I respect why it was there, that
mhm.
it's no longer needed. And
Yeah.
I want her to be free of it. And
Yeah.
it's a daily reminder of the things that I have to remove from how I parent her, because that was how I was parented. And it's beautiful to watch her just have this language I didn't have until my 30s. What? The other day we were in the
Yeah.
car and and we were talking about acceptance and accepting other people, and everyone's different. You don't have to be good at things for someone to like you and all this. And she
Mm.
goes, yeah, mama, like you are not good at painting rocks, but I love you anyway. And I was like, yeah, I am bad at painting rocks. And like that just perspective was not given when I was growing up. And so it's this beautiful process. And I have had, speaking of healers, so many of the healers, we have a lot of people pleasing and we have a lot of giving in order to make sure our worth is intact.
Mhm.
So I've had many healers benefit from it and take it themselves. And then I've also had healers use the manual, because it comes with a manual that then belongs to the person, and actually use the manual with their clients, which is kind of cool. So I love that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So if clients are struggling with perfectionism, there's a lot of exercises and handouts and things like that. So it's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I really don't know anybody who wouldn't benefit from it.
Aw.
But I also really, that speaks to me too, because that was something that in the very, very early part of working with individuals and helping them to heal from, you know, all of these different things, right? And
Yeah.
in different ways. And even before I got my master's and my license and all of that stuff, I was still working with, you know, rewiring the brain and somatic
Yes.
therapy and all of these different
Mhm.
things, right? But there was a piece of me that thought, and it wasn't until probably 2016, 2017 that I really, really realized that I didn't have to make someone better.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. That
That's
it's not
big.
on us. Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yep.
And
I
there's a lot of healers out there that it's interesting because to the innocent eye, if they see that somebody like you or me or someone else who might be a little bit more mindful of that is working with someone and they're detaching with support and love, but detaching, right, from fixing, somebody else can come in and they'll be like, oh, well, I can just fix everything. Right. And we call that hijacking their journey. But I think that's a really, really, really good point. And I think that is going to be very helpful for our fellow healers as well, because it's painful. It's really painful. It's hard to sit with someone who's suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I tell my clients, I'm right all of the time. Right. But I don't, and I'm kind of tongue in cheek, but I, we do understand, right, certain things after a while, which is why people come to us, and because we have success in helping with the awakening. But the only thing that's perfect is timing.
Yeah.
And we're not in charge of that. As the healer, as the helper, we're not in charge of the timing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The person, the origin of whatever it is really the dictator of the timing, not even the person who is experiencing it. It's really just allowing that wounded piece of the psyche, or whatever it might be, that space to get comfortable, to come take up a little bit of space. Like you said, just take up a little space and then see how it feels and then come back. Right. And then let us know how it is that they need to be healed and how it is that they need to be supported. So I think that this is going to speak into all of those things in so many ways. I'm so excited. I'm excited to sink my teeth into it. I'm going to have 2 weeks off, the end of this month and the beginning of next. And so I'm like, thinking, I don't even know what I have all these books that I want to read.
I know. I have a stack, right? I have a stack.
And now this. So, gosh, I feel like we could just go on and on and on. And I really do hope that you'll come back again and talk with us.
Yes,
and
please.
I just want to say that you already have been in our hearts for sure, but now you are officially part of the Thrive community. Yes. Because you're really teaching people how to really thrive in such a beautiful way. And that's, to me, that's so meaningful. That's the most meaningful thing that you can do, So thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been such a joy to actually be able to see you as we're talking.
I know.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you for having me. And it's such a joy because I've admired your work for so long.
Oh, same. I mean, that's a beautiful thing, right? Is we get to really support one another in this journey of really doing our best to help others to be their best.
I love it. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And to everybody, thanks for listening today. And we are sending you peace and love. And until the next time.